On Monday, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Ben Carson hit the campaign trail for Georgia Republican Senate nominee Herschel Walker. Carson, who ran for the Republican presidential nomination in 2016, urged Peach State voters to coalesce behind Walker in his effort to unseat Democratic incumbent Senator Raphael Warnock. Carson is one of many Republican heavyweights who have joined Walker in their efforts to keep the Senate 50-50. After disappointing midterm elections, Republicans have set their hopes on winning back the Georgia Senate seat they lost in 2021. Recent polls show the race neck and neck, with many political observers believing that turnout of Republican voters is key. Incumbent Republican Governor Brian Kemp easily won re-election in November, but it was crossover votes to Warnock that kept victory out of Walker's reach.
Thank you for coming out today for this very important time in our country. You know, the founders of America were great men, and they had a vision of a country that would remain free, that was run on the will of the people. Now, the Europeans thought we were crazy. They said, you can't run a country on the will of the people. You have to have a monarch. You have to have a ruling body. But they were certain that it could be done. They studied every government that had ever existed in the world, and they picked the good things, and they excluded the bad things. And they had a lot of controversy, and it looked like they weren't going to be able to get the Constitution done. Benjamin Franklin, the elder statesman, said, "Gentlemen, stop arguing, and let's get down on our knees and let's seek wisdom from God." And they all knelt down and they got up and they gave us a wonderful Constitution. And when Benjamin Franklin came out of that Constitution Hall, he was asked, "Sir, what do we have here? A monarchy or a republic?" He said, "A republic, if you can keep it." Well, this is what we're at right now. We're at the crux. Are we going to be able to keep it? This is the most danger that we've ever had for our republic, quite frankly. But this election is not about people, quite frankly. It is about ideas. It is about the ideals that made us into the country that we are. Now, the other side will do everything they can to make it about people, so that they can tell lies and they can distort things and they can get people distracted because they don't want to talk about the ideas and the policy. Why would they? And they want us to think, they want us, the American people, to think that we are each other's enemies. That somehow, based on religion, based on race, income, age, gender, anything they can, they want to drive wedges in and make us believe that we are not friends, but we are. And that's one of the ways that this country became a great country. There were families all over, 20 families, 50, 100 families, isolated from any other community. Why were they able not only to survive, but to thrive? Because they worked together. They used their collective skills. And they didn't care about people's political orientation. And that's so important. And also common sense. There's a reason it's called common sense. It doesn't exist in Washington, but it exists in the rest of the country. It does. And, you know, we're talking in this election about common sense versus ideology. So you look at some of the things that we're dealing with, like the environment and energy. Now, of course, we know that we're supposed to take care of our environment. God charged us with taking care of the earth that He had given us, and we do that. But that doesn't mean that you have to be stupid. It doesn't mean that you have to relegate everything to some funny ideal that you're changing the climate. Remember, it was, first of all, the ice age was coming. We were all going to freeze. And then we were all going to burn up. And then it became clear that none of that was happening, so they just it changed. We're going to have to change because we're causing all these problems. I'll tell you, when the problem, that's when there's no change. When things stop changing, we are dead. And we can't allow that to rule us. That's ideology. Common sense tells us what we can do. We can use the resources that God has given us, our natural fossil fuels, which we have learned how to use quite effectively, and we can use those until we get the technology in place to be able to use renewable energy. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can use them together, and as it becomes sensible so that you're not wreaking havoc upon the average American who's going to have trouble paying for those gasoline prices and everything that is dependent on gasoline and delivery, the diesel fuel, all this is hurting our people. We don't need to do that. Not only that, but by stopping our production, we're putting the keys of power in the hands of Putin and people like that. Why would we give him and the Chinese all of these advantages? I don't know that doesn't make any sense. That's not common sense. And then what about life and death? We have people who are trying to convince a woman that the greatest blessing, which is that baby in her womb, is her enemy, and that she needs to get rid of it, and that she has a right to do that. She has a right to protect that baby from those who want to kill that baby. That's why God created it that way. We do, however, have to talk about alternatives. Sometimes women end up in a difficult situation. We need to be talking about ways to make adoption easy. There are hundreds of thousands of people who want to adopt, but it's too expensive and it's too complicated. We got to fix that and make those alternatives available. And then what about our border? Common sense tells you that you have to have a border if you're going to have a sovereign country. Well, I could talk about that all day, but here's the key point. Who's coming into that southern border? Terrorists, people who want to destroy our nation. And the only reason they haven't succeeded yet is because of the grace of God. We need to keep praying for the grace of God until we get some intelligent leadership. And then what about our schools? What are they for? Are they for education or for indoctrination? And we see so much indoctrination going on with our children. And we must be just as aggressive as they are to make sure they can learn the right things. And then have you noticed how everything is racist now? Everything is racist. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't any racism. There is. But I'm telling you, in my lifetime, we have made enormous progress. I mean, when I was a kid and a black person came on television in a non-servile role, it was a big deal. You called everybody into the living room, hey, look at this is great. And now, in the same lifetime, you have black admirals and generals and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and heads of foundations and presidents of universities. We've had a president elected twice, a vice president, although you never see her. So, I mean, that's in one lifetime. So do we as Americans have the ability to recognize bad things and to change them? We absolutely do. And that's what we should be emphasizing. And what is the responsibility of the government? To keep our people safe. Have you noticed that a lot of people don't feel safe anymore? We're looking out more for the criminals than we are for the victims. That makes no sense at all. That's not common sense, that's ideology. And that's something that has, and I got to tell you, being a black conservative is tough. Because for the left, the only thing worse than Satan is a black conservative. They don't like the idea of black people who think for themselves, and it does not work for them. And they want to use anyone as an example and hurt them and hurt their families so that everybody else will just behave themselves. Herschel's not going to do that. But I want to end by saying today, the 28th of November, is the 50th anniversary of a very important event in my life. My wife and I were both students at Yale, and we were poor, so we couldn't afford to go home for Thanksgiving. But the university would pay your way home if you would recruit for them, the city that you came from. So both my wife and I went. We were both from Detroit, and we recruited, and it was time for us to go back. We were also on the university's credit card, so we got a chance to go out to dinner and all kinds of stuff. That was pretty cool, you know. But we had to get the car back, so we were going to drive all night on the 28th of November, 1972, and we were going to keep each other awake, but she was already asleep before we got out of Michigan. And in Youngstown, Ohio, on Interstate 80, I was going 90 miles an hour, and I fell asleep at the wheel. And we were both awakened by the vibration of the car as it was hitting the gravel on the side of the road and going off into a ravine. And I grabbed the wheel and I turned it, and instead of flipping over and going into the ravine, it just started spinning like a top on the highway. And it stopped in the lane next to the shoulder. I was able to pull off as an 18-wheeler came rolling through. We were both awake at that point. And we just prayed and we thanked God. We said, God saved our lives because he had something for us to do. And the life that Herschel has led has prepared him because God has something for him to do. Ladies and gentlemen, Herschel Walker.